And so today we're going to talk about heart transplant and exercise. And we have our partners from Good Shepherd to share as a panel. And the whole message is to stay fit for life. I'm Jim Gleason, for those who don't know me, most of you do. And I'm celebrating my 25th anniversary this past Saturday. I don't know if you saw, there's an article, it's a long article in the Washington Post magazine just 2 weeks ago. And I almost didn't read it, but 4 people sent it to me, so I had to read the whole long thing. And toward the end, it was something that really struck out with me. And from that post, it said, transplant survival rates, while vastly better than before, are still not extraordinary. Only half survive for 10 years or more. 15 years is considered excellent. 20 is remarkable. And the phrase that really caught me, 25 is nearly unheard of. And I thought, you know, I really do appreciate every day. But I never quite thought that it was that extraordinary, because I've met people out 34 years, for example. And we share that by way, not bragging, but by inspiration. You know, yeah. Keep coming, you can do it. I gotta tell you, 25, it's exceptional, but when you meet somebody that's out 30 years or more, that's a different generation. Wow. Those people were over-medicated because they really didn't know yet what worked. As long as it worked, they kept doing it. And the 34-year-out patient I met, if you would ask me, Jim, how old was he? I would have guessed he was 85, okay? He was 59. Wow. Those medications so affected his body back then that he aged that much. And so we are truly blessed with where we are today in this amazing technology, and that's what today is all about, protecting that. And so our speakers today, Joe Adler, some of you know these people because you've worked with them, Malky, and Sarah, and Ben, and there's others here that I don't have on this, so they're going to introduce themselves.
It's great to see everybody, and it's definitely an honor to be here. I was really appreciative when Sally reached out and said that the topic she was thinking of was exercise in the post-transplant patient, and I brought in several of my colleagues. So right here on this panel is a group of physical therapists. Claire is stepping in for Ben. Ben couldn't make it today, he's doing some other training. And occupational therapist Malky and Sarah. Amongst the 4 of us, we have a ton of experience working not only in the ICUs, but also in the non-surgical critical care units at Penn and on the floors, on the post-surgical floors. So there's a lot of familiar faces out here, which is great, some new ones too. And I think that for us that work in the hospital, just to give you a little, kind of a background, to be able to see everybody here this far out, we get a little skewed in the hospital because of what we're doing, and then once you leave, we don't get a chance necessarily to see how you're doing. So I think we're looking forward to hearing your experience and your stories a little bit to help inform maybe the next time we give a talk and what we should be telling people. So we have experience. We are exercise activity sort of experts, but what we really do is we really learn from what you guys are doing at home or what you're not doing and how we can help support that, because 25 years is extraordinary. But I think there is a place for longevity, of course, but I think everybody is as interested in quality of life, right? And you want to be as fit as possible and be able to do all the things that you want to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And if you have questions while we're doing it, that's fine. There's going to be time at the end to have questions and answers, okay? So welcome, everybody. So the objective is a little background. We're going to talk about, why we're here and what the point is. I think review who should be exercising. What do you think the answer to that is? Everybody? Right? Hey, right there, Russell. Discuss what exercises you can do, and review how to safely exercise and monitor yourself, which is probably the most important thing, I think. And you can see we have a huge spectrum. So Russell's just brand new, sort of working it out, trying to get himself together. You've got people doing marathons and Ironman competitions. So there's obviously a large spectrum, and everything that we say is not going to apply to everybody, but hopefully you'll be able to take nuggets that are appropriate for you and leave maybe some of the other things that aren't. And very importantly, how to safely exercise and monitor yourself, like I said, and then consider ways to conserve energy, right? Because sometimes, even if you're years out, you can have a period of time where your energy is really low, and then how do you figure out what are the most important things to do and how to conserve your energy so that you can do those things and you're not completely wiped out. And then there'll be time for questions and answers, and you can teach us a lot about what you're doing. We recognize this is a long journey, right? And it starts with us, usually, the nursing staff and the great physicians that are in the ICUs, just trying to get you over that immediate surgical phase. I hope for most of you that that ICU period is fading away and is a distant memory, because it's not a lot of fun for people. You wake up and you feel terrible and you're in a pain, and there's us standing over going, "Hey, Russell, how you doing? Time to get up. How do you feel?" And you're like, "Oh, that's the last thing that I think that I want to do." But we know that unless there are reasons to stay in bed in the beginning, we got to get you mobilized because of all the negative effects of being in bed and inactivity. I think we can all attest to that, right? Every part of your body, your brain, your soul gets impacted negatively when you're just lying in bed staring up at those lights. You feel helpless. You can't really do anything. So we think that if we can impart a little bit of activity and independence initially, that's helpful. And as you move forward, to hopefully bigger and better things and more activity and more independence, you feel better about what you're doing. And I think that we recognize that it takes, how long? You tell us, 6 months, maybe a year before you begin to feel normal? Who can say how long it took them initially after surgery and leaving the hospital before you felt anywhere near kind of normal?
9 months.
9 months.
I'm about 7 months now, but it took the first 4 months to feel anywhere near I used to.
Right.
Still working.
Okay, yeah. Anybody longer? Anybody, right? I mean, so that's a human amount of time, right? Months. And so you've got a lot of people that are encouraging you to do things, to get up, to be active, and you feel terrible. You just don't feel like yourself, and you're trying to, piece it all together. So not everybody makes it to transplant games, like this gentleman over here, the World Transplant Games, but obviously we have right here, right? Yeah, but some do, and Jim also, right? So that's fantastic. And who? Bill, right? Okay. Last one was where?
Salt Lake City last summer.
Right. Really? What events?
Cycling,
Uh-huh.
medaled, badminton, singles and double, medaled, and pickleball, medaled.
Pickleball. That's like, yeah. Is that a World Transplant Game now? Pickleball? Really?
That wasn't the World Games. The World Games were this summer in England, Newcastle.
Okay. Oh, awesome. So I think that what that shows is that transplant alone is not a restriction to doing, like amazing things. Yeah, everybody might individually feel like a transplant game status is different than actually going and running and doing like that. So what we're going to try to do is encourage everybody to optimize their fitness. So obviously there's a wide range since you've had surgery. We've heard, Russell's our baby here at 7 weeks, right? 6 weeks. And we have all the way to 25 years. So obviously there may be different precautions or restrictions regarding the time you are away from surgery for some of the newer folks, and maybe for you guys that can remember, we'll talk a little bit about some of that early stuff and maybe some other things to think about as you go farther if you're being medicated for something or if you have some abnormal heart rhythm. But our goal here is to figure out a way to encourage everybody to get back to being as active as you want. And a big part of that is cardiac rehabilitation. So how many folks here went through a formal cardiac rehabilitation program? Okay, so many, right, the majority, which is great. The good thing is it's a super organized, structured, monitored program that will really take you from one place to another place in a safe environment. And Medicare is the governing insurance body that sort of establishes reimbursement rates for all the other insurance companies. And with this diagnosis of open heart surgery and transplant, it's absolutely a covered program because it's physician supervised, cardiac nurses, therapists, or exercise physiologists are there. And if you haven't gone ever, you still are appropriate to go. You get one time to go, but it's not like you have to go within a certain time. So at the end, we can talk about different places. Maliki has made up some handouts we have of places in the tri-state area that have active programs that we know about. But we're going to continue to recommend cardiac rehab if you haven't been through one and you feel like you need to kind of advance your activity level safely and you're a little unsure about what to do. So remember back in the day when you first started working, and maybe Russell, you still have some of these sternal precautions, but you had a big slice down the middle of your chest. You have to put your breastbone back together, wire it up. And so the first couple of months, really 2 to 3 months, we and all the other therapists that were involved in your care were always telling you not to push up too much with your hands, don't lift anything heavy, give your chest a chance to heal. And so that could cause a little bit of restriction for what you wanted to do. But usually, once you're 3 months out or so, if the healing went well, then there's really no restrictions to doing you know, lifting, we don't expect you to be major weightlifter. Or do you guys do any weightlifting? And do you have any restrictions for, okay, so here you go. So you're like, how many years out? 9 years?
9.
What's the heaviest weight you're lifting?
With upper body and lower.
Yeah, upper body.
300?
300 pounds? Okay, you're done. You're done. So 300 pounds, his chest is obviously well healed up, so there you go. Now, often people that have either abnormal heart rhythm or an elevated heart rate will be taking medications to lower your heart rate, right? So everybody's heard of beta blockers, and maybe at some point in your arc of transplant, you have to take a beta blocker. And the reason this is important is because whenever we're recommending exercise, there are certain ways to guide the intensity of how much you're doing. And the classic way is to figure out a target heart rate, which Claire and Sarah are going to talk about a little bit, and then be able to monitor that heart rate somehow so that you're not, you know, going beyond what a target heart rate would be so you can safely exercise. But if you're taking medication that blunts that response, then that's not the appropriate thing to do because your heart's not responding normally to exercise, which it's supposed to not do if you're taking the medication, right? So that's something we can talk about a little bit later. So here's an example. If you look at the left side of the graph, this is your heart rate in beats per minute, right? So going all the way up to 200. And this is an idea of increasing activity demand, right? In terms of how much oxygen you're going to consume or take up during the demand. The more that you can consume and use, usually the more demanding activity it is. So if your heart rate is responding normally to exercise, the blue here, you'll see as the exercise activity gets harder, your heart rate is going to go up, right? And that's what's normally supposed to happen. Even if you start from a little bit of an elevated place like most people post-transplant. But if you're taking a beta blocker, like metoprolol or anything like that, your heart rate is going to go up, but it's going to go up very little, right? And that's on purpose to reduce the stress on the heart because you may have been beating too hard or you have an abnormal rhythm. So just be careful, and Claire's going to talk a lot with Sarah as well about other ways to monitor yourself if you're on some medications to keep your heart rate purposefully low. So cardiac rehab, right? We know incontrovertibly, right, unequivocally, that if you can go to a program, I don't want to stand behind the monitor, so and participate in the 8 or 10 weeks that it is, usually twice a week or 3 times a week, that there are going to be several outcomes which are going to be very positive. And we know that your exercise tolerance after that time is going to go up, so you're going to be able to do more. And most people tell us that when they can do more, they just feel better about being able to have more energy to exercise or to be active or to go out or to be with family, whatever it is. Also, symptoms of fatigue and shortness of breath get better. Like there are so many studies out there that have looked at people that started cardiac rehab and finish it and what the outcomes are. And like these are so common, these positive outcomes, that there's nobody that we don't recommend it for, basically. All right? And the other big thing, of course, which is important, is a reduction in mortality, which is a nice thing to know. You'll be alive longer. Sir?
There's studies that also show there's a reduction in follow-on cardiac events
Correct.
as well.
Absolutely. I didn't want to make the slide too busy, but that's very important. And maybe, do you think from your perspective, because you had training, had to monitor yourself, or you pushed yourself under the right circumstances too, and knew kind of how far you could go?
Do I?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it's interesting to figure out like why that might be, but I think that a lot of people get a lot of confidence that they don't have initially in exercising because you know you're being monitored like you were in the hospital and you're going in a stepwise fashion, right? So that's great to know. So this is my last slide, but so what this shows, again, in terms of like how much oxygen your body can consume and the demand of the activity. So on the left side of the slide is oxygen consumption, and higher would be better, right? If you're really struggling just to get out of bed and to walk around the house, obviously your level of fitness can probably get better. And if you're doing a triathlon or whatever, you're going to be consuming a lot of oxygen during that activity. And what this shows us is that years from transplant, most people have the ability to consume more oxygen and be more fit, and that arrow goes up. However, the caveat to this is you got to be active. You have to have a program. You can't just wake up one day and say, okay, I'm going to start doing a marathon, and all of a sudden expect that you're going to do it. Okay? All right. Well, it's great to see everybody. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Claire.
Claire. I'm another one of the physical therapists here at Hub. My goal is to talk about how to build an exercise program for those of you who don't exercise very regularly or are newer out from transplant. And maybe if you already are exercising regularly, how to adjust or add something to your program that could help be a little bit more beneficial. So in general, the Department of Health, the American Heart Association, which are both great resources, they recommend at least 150 minutes of aerobic exercise every week, and then at least 2 days of strength training. So we'll go more into what exactly this means and how you can fit that into your program. Basic guidelines, so if you're wondering what can you do for exercise, I mean, it's something that you enjoy. It can be anything that gets your heart beating faster, whether that's walking, jogging, swimming, cycling, elliptical equipment at the gym, anything that you enjoy. How often should you be doing it? 150 minutes at least, up to 300 or more. That's not really a cap, but if you're newer to exercise, probably closer to that 150 spread throughout the week, and then as you're more experienced and you're exercising more, you can definitely increase the time. Like I said, you want to spread that out throughout the week so you're not doing all of that in one day, and that's going to help avoid excessive fatigue and also prevent the risk of injury if you're doing too much in one day. And it gives your muscles a chance to recover so that you can do more. And how hard should you be working? So we'll go over a couple scales and ways to measure how hard you're working, but in generally moderate exercise to vigorous. So you can push yourself, harder than a lot of people think, I would say. So one way, as Joe mentioned, is to use your heart rate as a measure of how hard you're working. So you can measure your heart rate, your pulse, your wrist, your neck, and if you had your transplant here, you probably learned this in cardiac group in the hospital, but you can count how many beats over a minute of time, and that's your heart rate, beats per minute. If you're, so that's your heart rate. What should your max heart rate be? 220 minus your age. So if I'm 60 years old, 220 minus 60 would be 160, so that would be the max heart rate for me. Moderate exercise is about 50 to 70% of that. Okay, so you're do a little bit of math, you figure out the percentage. For a 60-year-old, it would be about 80 to 112 beats per minute, and that's what you would want to maintain for moderate exercise. So if you were doing moderate exercise, like we talked about 150 minutes a week, you could split that up over 5 days, 30 minutes a day. And vigorous intensity, which is going to be a higher heart rate, so looking more like 70 to 90, pushing yourself a little further, you could do that 15 minutes a day, and to get about 75 minutes total a week. So a lot of numbers, but just know moderate intensity, you would do it a little bit longer, but vigorous activity, you would do a little bit shorter, still spread throughout the week. Again, as Joe mentioned, if you are taking a beta blocker, or you have a history of AFib that you're currently being monitored for, this is probably not the best. Well, if you're taking a beta blocker, this is not the measure you should be using to adjust your exercise. So another scale to measure how hard you're working, the modified Borg scale, which you may have seen before. This one goes from 1 to 10. So rate of perceived exertion, how hard you feel like you're working. 1, you're sitting on a couch, watching TV. 10 is, you're sprinting at the last part of a race, right? So that's your maximal exertion. If you're doing moderate exercise, that's right about a 5 or a 6. So sometimes it's helpful to kind of put a number next to it. The talk test, so if you're doing moderate exercise, you should be able to have a conversation with the person next to you. You shouldn't be gasping for air, or else that probably means you're getting up higher in those numbers. And you should be able to talk, but not sing. That's another way people used to measure. So again, that's for moderate exercise. This is an example of a workout. So this is, again, continuous exercise, moderate level. This could be walking, this could be jogging, cycling, swimming. Always important to have a warm up and a cool down. You'll see that at the start and the end. And in the middle, the main chunk, that's your continuous moderate exercise where your Borg scale is about a 5 to 6. You're keeping your heart rate up the whole time, continuously. Another example of a aerobic exercise you could do is high-intensity interval training, which is shown to be pretty effective in the transplant population. So again, you're still starting with your warm-up, ending with your cool-down, both very important. But instead of staying just at that moderate intensity the whole time, you're going to fluctuate between higher. So you see the first spike is a Borg scale of about 7 to 8, so you're working pretty hard. You're probably not going to be able to hold a conversation. And then you're alternating with, a lower level. So you're not stopping in between. You're still doing moderate, exertion in between, but you're fluctuating between the two for about 3 to 4 minutes. Again, this is just an example. So if you're are doing that interval training and you're using the Borg scale to measure how hard you're working, again, you're switching between that 5 to 6, jumping up to that 7 to 8, and then coming down back and forth in between the two. So that was all examples of aerobic exercise, both the continuous exercise and the interval training. This is one slide on strength training. So the basic principles for that are you want to hit all your major muscle groups. You don't want to favor anything. How often should you do it? At least 2 days per week, and we recommend at least giving a day in between you do the strength training. So if you strength train on Monday, maybe do some aerobic exercise Tuesday, so you give your muscles a chance to rest and recover, and strength train again on Wednesday, for example. How hard should you be working? Moderate intensity. We recommend focusing more on the muscular endurance, so the higher reps, than increasing the weight. That's the main focus for this population. If you've never had a strength training program, or it's been a long time since you've done one, we recommend reaching out to an exercise professional of some sort, whether that's an athletic trainer. Most of you are probably past the home PT portion, but you can also go to outpatient physical therapy, and they can help build you a program, make sure you're using appropriate weights, making sure your posture is good while you're doing everything to avoid injury. That's the last thing we want. This is an example of a week of training. So it kind of puts everything that I said into one slide so far. Again, this isn't the only way to do it. It's just an example. We have a couple days, so Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. I put some aerobic training, so you have some continuous training with a couple days of high-intensity interval training, and then 2 days of strength training in between those, and the total exercise minutes about 150. So this would be a good example of somewhere to start. Another thing to mention, and Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about this, but metabolic equivalents you may have heard, or METs, and this is different activities have, the METs have been calculated for how demanding they are in your body, how much oxygen they demand. So you can see higher up on the list are lower METs, so things like sitting and standing, that's going to be less demanding on your body, right? As you go down the list, it's more demanding, something like hiking or jump rope. So the main point is any activity that you're interested probably has a metabolic equivalent that you could find online. But it gives you an idea of how things progress, how to do something that's maybe a little bit more intense moving down the list. If you're just starting to exercise, you probably shouldn't jump right into hiking or jump rope. Maybe pick something higher on the list to start, like walking or yard work, and then as you get more fit, picking activities that are down the list a little further. Just a few notes on when to modify or stop your exercise. Hopefully this doesn't impede your exercise program, but getting short of breath for things you regularly do. So if an activity you do regularly is a lot harder, or you become more fatigued or short of breath, that might be a time to modify or stop that exercise. If you notice you're breathing a lot faster, your breaths become shorter, that could be a reason. You're sweating a lot more than normal, you feel confused, dizzy, lightheaded, or if someone you're with notices that you're pale. So this is just a couple of examples, but you know your body best. It's okay to stop or modify, if you're feeling off. And that's all I have. I'm going to pass it off to Sarah.
So as Joe introduced us, I'm Sarah with Occupational Therapy. I see one familiar face. So this slide and kind of the topic that I'm talking about is more so in relation to the concept of energy conservation, which I think anyone like post-op a few weeks to even 25 years can kind of take into account post-transplant. I think it's important to learn how to reduce energy expenditure in order to engage in those activities that are of most interest and value to you guys. And then some of the reasons why I think it's really important to incorporate energy conservation, you guys should as well, is including improving your total endurance, so allowing you to do more of the activities that are meaningful to you. Simplifying some of these tasks will reduce the amount of stress, so stress in regards to the surgery site, and pain, which is more so can be talked about with the acute patients that are kind of a couple weeks out of transplant, even up to like 3 months when you have those restrictions and precautions. And then also allowing optimal performance while minimizing how much physical output you're giving with each activity. So applying energy conservation as you guys are progressing through this recovery process and becoming more independent, if not very independent in your daily activities, it's important to think about incorporating energy conservation strategies in order to prevent overexertion. So some simple ways to implement these strategies are considering the 4 Ps. So the first P would be planning, so thinking ahead. What that could mean is planning for the right time during the day, even the week, when you're the least fatigued to do certain activities. Simplifying, organizing, and also preparing ahead. The next P would be pacing, so thinking about allowing enough time to complete a task, modifying or eliminating like activities or doing them in the beginning of the week and allowing the least goal set activity to the end of the week or vice versa. Looking for body signals. I know Claire just mentioned a few, some that your caregivers can look for as well. But I'll kind of talk a little bit further about signs of cardiac distress in the next slide. And then again, during the week and during the daytime. Prioritizing is the next one. So thinking about choosing the most important tasks, what's meaningful to you. Getting help as needed at those appropriate times. I know we're trying to get you as independent as possible when you're going home, but I think it's also important to ask for help when you think it's a reasonable time. And investing in equipment. I don't know if anyone's familiar with any type of like dressing, bathing, equipment or aids. You can always look online or a local medical supply store has them as well. And then positioning, so yourself, objects, and the environment. So while we encourage you all to perform daily self-care, it's part of your routine as tolerated, it's important to be aware of your own response to that activity. So signs of cardiac distress, thinking of shortness of breath, so exertional breathlessness, chest pain, changes in vital signs. I know Claire had mentioned a couple ways to see how your perceived level of exertion is, so kind of see how hard your body's working. So I have a Borg scale as well, it's just not the modified version, so you see a scale from 6 to 20. It really correlates more to the heart rate, so 60 to 100 is a resting heart rate typically. Again, if you have any arrhythmias or if you're on any medications, that could be altered. But then if you're working very, very hard and that activity is very demanding on your body, think of how high your heart rate's going. So like here, like the 190s, 200s for the very, very hard. And then here are some of those MET levels that Claire had mentioned, the metabolic equivalents. So what you want to think about with this is whether you're acutely post-op to even months, out of surgery to years, the simplest of tasks, so like grooming, bathing, may present to you more of a challenge than you would have expected. Things that may have been previously simple now may take more of a toll on your body and require more energy throughout the day. Not just that, but accelerate the fatigue at a quicker pace. So you could see here, grooming, hygiene, bathing, showering, and dressing, things that you would think, obviously do it every day, but it's going to be taxing on you. So I put the MET levels for the equivalent of each task. So you see as the physical demand of the activity will progress, you'll find that the MET levels then increase. So that typically, like I said, and like Claire mentioned, it correlates with the increased oxygen demand. And then listed below each activity, you'll see compensatory strategies or ways of reducing that metabolic demand and increasing your participation. So this would be, so one example would be keeping your hair short, going to the professionals for hygiene and grooming, bathing, think about like long-handled equipment, a handheld shower, and dressing, think about dressing your lower body prior to your upper body, and all of them have sitting for some of these activities as well. I kind of further progress the activity. So meal prep, cooking, house cleaning, laundry, the METs do increase with that. And there's just some other options. So for cooking, think about electric appliances, lightweight cookware, house cleaning, lightweight vacuum, breaking up the activity. And then laundry, more trips with lighter baskets and liquid pump containers, so you're not carrying so much. And then the big part of this is getting back to a new life, right? So self-care adherence, I think we bolded, underlined, colored, remember a healthy heart begins with you. So what that means is taking ownership of your care and kind of taking ownership of your entire recovery process, getting back to reestablishing those life roles that are of most interest and meaning to you. Another big important part in the recovery is going to be those caregivers. So they play an essential role during this recovery phase, asking them, like I said, for assistance as needed, while maintaining as much independence as you can is really what we're striving for. And getting back to prior hobbies. So I think we touched a lot on outpatient cardiac rehab. If you haven't utilized that benefit, like Joe was mentioning, you can, if you haven't done so already with the type of surgery you had. And then the other part was other outpatient therapy services. So I think it's really important to think about going back to work. There's been research that shows that less than 50% of heart transplant patients between the ages of 20 and 50 don't return back to work post-op 5 years. So through the Penn Network, we do have a work hardening program that can help progress your tolerance to tasks and skills specific to workplace responsibilities. So that's just something extra to think about. And Malachi's going to answer any questions.
So I have the hardest
Yeah.
job of the talk, and that is to answer any questions individuals have. Or is there anything that we can explain further that didn't make sense? Yeah.
Could you comment on the impact of the denervated heart on heart rate and for how long that issue is important in terms of gauging your heart rate and your activity?
Sure. Joe can certainly answer that question for you.
Is this on? Should I put this on or? We need this on? Is it on?
The light should
Push up.
push up.
Oh, there we go. That's a great question. Certainly, and there is no defined time frame that happens when we know that your body, so basically just, I mean, everybody I'm sure is aware, but when your new heart is put in, the old heart is removed, the nervous input that helps to regulate your heart rate up and down, the autonomic or automatic part of your nervous system that you don't have to think about, that flight or fight response, is removed basically, right? So the nerves, they don't reattach the nerves onto your heart. Which is why very frequently, if you remember it all in your intensive care time, or even maybe when you were in the hospital, your heart is often manipulated to keep the heart rate up higher than it normally would, because we want to make sure you have enough cardiac output circulating around your body, and if the normal mechanisms aren't there, you need some support, otherwise, you know, you feel terrible, your heart rate is either low, your blood pressure drops, all that stuff. So certainly in the initial weeks, if not months, we expect your heart rate to, you know, not respond appropriately maybe to activity, because your body is really getting used to the circulating kind of hormones that help to regulate your heart rate more, and that takes longer than when nerves are directly attached onto your heart. But what we know now, and have you actually had any, has anybody had any exercise stress testing months out? You have, right? So when was the last one? Was it December, and treadmill, did that whole treadmill thing, and probably because you're doing all these major activities, right? And so we get people on a treadmill and do a stress test, or if we inject them with immutamine or some kind of drug to see if their heart rate goes up, what we're looking for is to see what ends that activity. And what we're looking for ultimately and ideally is that your heart rate is going to achieve your predicted heart rate max before something else stops it. That you feel bad, your legs are tired, whatever it is, right? So did you achieve heart rate maximum, right? So what that means is that at some point with continued activity and exercise and fitness, you're able to achieve a normal heart rate target that people that don't have transplants would get. Do you know what I'm saying? So the long-winded answer to your question is we don't know specifically, I can't tell you, oh, in 6 months your heart rate's going to respond appropriately, in a year it's going to, we don't know that. But what we do know is that over time, with continued activity, that you can achieve the same kind of heart rate response without being manipulated by a pacemaker or drugs that people your age without having a transplant have.
But if your resting heart rate, if you're in that phase where things haven't readjusted,
Yep.
your resting heart rate is, say, 90.
Uh-huh.
So how do you gauge?
So you should, so a resting heart rate or an activity-related heart rate, whether it's because of a denervated heart or it is what it is. So you should still pay attention to that and still work off of some kind of basic formula for your predicted heart rate max during activity. So we probably think about an elevated resting heart rate just to say that then your heart rate reserve, which is the difference between your resting and your max, is just now a little bit smaller. So you should expect that the room that you have to do activity, becomes a little more narrow if you're starting from an elevated place.
So your target heart rate would be the same?
Correct, right? And your max heart rate is always going to be with that sort of basic formula, 220 minus your age. That's a conservative way to go, an easy way to go. So you minus your age from 220, that'll give you your max heart rate. And then like Claire had said, depending on what you want to do, you have to figure out, am I going to start a moderate percentage below that or a vigorous percentage below that? And if it's moderate or less, you're like 50% of that target heart rate. If you're going to be vigorous and have to do, swimming with the sharks in Hawaii, it better be 80 or 90 or whatever it is, right? But, so that number is what it is. It just might alter your capacity to get there if you're already starting at 90 instead of 60. You know what I mean? So that's why these methods of using the Borg scale or some other mechanism to say, well, can I breathe and speak normally, or in a very short amount of time am I so short of breath that I need to reduce or stop for a while, right? So if you can't do this because of whatever reason, or it's too much, complicated, or not everybody can do this and take the time, then those pictures that look how you feel, or the 6 to 20 scale, are absolutely recommended to help guide what you're doing.
And then if you're on beta blockers,
Yeah.
there's similar types of monitoring.
So if you're on beta blockers, don't count your heart rate to guide your intensity, because it's not, like that slide I showed, it's going to go up, but it's not going to go up normally. And so you're going to be working at a rate that your heart rate is not going to tell you by doing this, okay, I'm at that level, let me stop. So you want to use some of these other methods just that have been derived and have been kind of validated with patients that have had cardiac surgery as safe methods to guide your intensity. And we expect, just like a heart rate response to get better over time, we expect, like if you learn that Borg scale and you say, today I'm at if you use the 1 to 10 scale, today I'm at a 2 at rest, I worked out, I went up to a 4. We expect that to get better with exercise. So it'll take you longer to get to those places where we want you to slow down or stop. That's how you wouldn't just use it to say, okay, I look like the emoji that's got the tongue sticking out, I can't do anything. We expect it for you to take longer to get to that place, meaning you're able to do more and feel more fit.
Immediately post-transplant, so we have to remember that the heart itself is a muscle, and we're training that muscle itself. So we expect you to have lower levels of activity tolerance to begin with, and as you start to progress and recover through your transplant, we're focusing on rehabilitating that muscle itself, and your tolerance should start to increase more and more. But post-op transplant, like Claire was mentioning, you want to aim for that moderate level of activity where you can have a conversation. You're not necessarily completely breathless as well. But, yeah. Yep.
Can you talk about the role of hydration and dehydration?
Hydrate appropriately. I mean, the biggest thing you see with dehydration is low blood volume and low blood pressure, and then people feel bad, right? So so cardiac output, right, is the amount of blood every minute that you're able to cycle through your body, and that's a combination of two important things: the amount of times your heart is beating per minute, and the amount of blood that you're pumping out each beat. So if you're dehydrated, right, the blood you're pumping out each beat is going to probably go down. Now, your body has an innate ability, although it gets changed a little bit after transplant because of the neuro kind of connections, to increase or decrease the heart rate very quickly. It doesn't have the ability really quickly to change the blood volume for each beat, right? So what you often will see, and I don't know if anybody's experienced this, I have on a really hot summer day in the middle of August, I haven't been hydrating, you will have a reflexive elevated heart rate if your blood volume is low because you're dehydrated to make up, right? So if it's a combination between beats per minute and blood per beat, if your blood per beat is going down, the only way to maintain a cardiac output is to elevate your heart rate. So you might feel someday a resting elevated heart rate that's really high, but you need to drink a lot more fluid because your body's just trying to compensate to keep up, which is a good thing. You might feel it more, but it's actually a good mechanism that the body is doing. Yeah. So hydration, is key. And if some people have issues with diuretics, right, it's making you pee a lot, that's a complicated thing between trying to get volume of fluid out and trying to keep volume of volume in. And so that's where those conversations with your physicians is really important. And there's no easy formula for that. Trying to keep you hydrated, but get enough fluid off that you might be retaining. So it's a good question, though. Most people tend not to hydrate enough.
If you notice, though, that you gain 10 pounds in a week, you should definitely be having that conversation with your cardiologist.
Speaking of which, hold on, I'm gonna have a drink. Take a sip.
Look at your ankles.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yep. Yep.
I have a question for my husband. He's 6'8", but a lot of times when walking, he has a lot of burning in his legs. Does that have anything to do with the height, or perhaps just the fluid or the heartbeat going to toe the head?
Burning probably has a lot of possible causes, right? I mean, I think that he's had a lot of extra fluid, right? His ankles, knees, and has had a period now of inactivity. He was in the hospital just recently. We have to ask a lot of questions like, is it symmetrical? Where is it? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
Can you push through it?
It's getting better. Are you noticing it's getting better as the fluid is getting out of your body? Yeah. So probably that's part of the cause, and so we want him to not do anything, just keep getting better. If it gets better, then don't mess around with trying to intervene in a way. You know what I mean?
Good question.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm 6'6", and I have the exact same symptoms. I'm almost 7 months out. And it is getting better, but it took a long time. When I was in the hospital, my feet were needles. I was holding fluid for the whole time. And that's the worst part of it. My feet and my shins are still fluidy, but not to the point where I can't do anything. But it doesn't-
6'7", 6'8", probably because lack of oxygen up there.
I wasn't gonna say, but I was the expert.
But that's good to know, because we get worried.
Yep.
So that's,
Yeah,
how old is that?
I'm almost 7 months out.
I know it's going to be each very different, but.
Yeah.
It's not to say that it's not necessarily completely uncommon, we would just need to ask a lot more questions to figure out what can be the key underlying cause of it.
Are you taking diuretics at all?
Yeah.
Still? Okay. How many people are taking diuretics currently? Anybody else? No? This guy's a little bit closer? No? Okay. We're glad it's getting better, and it can be frustrating. I mean, I think for multiple conditions, as therapists, we hear this a lot where, people are feeling better in general, but this like swelling in the ankles and the shins just persists because if you're more active, your feet are down independent, and gravity is just helping any of the fluid that's there go south. And so, we get more concerned if at the end of the day you say you sit down, put your feet up, and it doesn't get better. If you put your feet up at the end of the day and it gets better because it's helping to drain a little bit, that's normal and everybody's different in their recovery. But if it doesn't get better, then we get more concerned that there's something else going on that might be obstructing your flow, you know.
Any other questions? Yep.
Yes.
To increase the body strength, upper and lower, the lifting weight is one of the options. Once you start with what kind of weights and then what duration that you go up into?
Claire, I'll answer that question.
Yeah, so if you're starting weight training, you're, kind of moderate intensity, lifting something that doesn't make you too sore. And then again, we want to focus on higher reps over weight. So maybe 15 to 20 reps, and you can do that 2 to 3 times. And at a moderate weight, so you're challenged. And then if you can tolerate 20 reps the next time, increasing the weight a little bit. Does that help?
Oh, yeah, maybe after a week or so, or 2 weeks?
To increase the weight?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say at least stick with the weight for 1 to 2 weeks before you increase it and make sure you feel good with that
Then
weight.
you try to increase, and if you think you can't do it, you come back.
Right, and if you can only do, you increase your weight and you can only do 10 reps, maybe bring it down a little bit so you can get closer to that 15 to 20. And then as 20 feels easier, that's when you're increasing the weight.
The other thing is I'm noticing that my grip, like opening a water bottle, now it's taking a little extra effort. Anything one can do to?
Yeah, grip strength, do you have any comments on that?
So, I mean, stuff that you have in your household, obviously keep doing what you're doing, because that's strengthening in and of itself, but then like chip clips, anything like that that you can kind of pinch, and then like stress balls that you can just buy. We have like resistive, like therapeutic foam, but it only goes so far. I feel like you're probably past that. So something that has a little bit more density to it, you could do that, but honestly,
ball or something?
yeah, but honestly, just utilizing your hands, keep doing what you're doing is therapy in and of itself to strengthen your hands. So yeah.
So I would just say, if you're able, the thing we get concerned about, we want you, to lift weights because we know that people feel better and get stronger. But the risk, if you haven't been doing it, is you could hurt yourself, right? So that's why if you have a chance to see a personal trainer or a PT or an OT or an exercise physiologist, because there are some formulas you can use, simple formulas, to know when it's time to progress. And it really, part of it depends on what your goals are. If you're going to be doing 300 pounds deadlifting for whatever, that's one thing. But most people want muscle endurance. So it's not a question of adding higher weights all the time, but just adding, like Claire said, more repetitions at a lower weight, because it's safer for most people, and it builds more muscle endurance than just absolute strength, right? And some exercise people will be able to tell you, listen, try a 1 repetition at a high weight, supervised and safe, and then work at some percentage below it. So if you could do 100 pounds, but you're not going to lift 100 pounds 20 times for the first week. So you say, okay, I'm going to do 50 pounds for 2 sets of 10 reps for 2 weeks. Then you go back and you try that 1 repetition again, and maybe now it's 120 pounds you can do. And then you take a percentage below that, which is higher than it was before. And that's one, there's a lot of different programs. Do a 1 repetition max, do 5 repetition max, but then work at some percentage below that.
So it's a good idea to start with the physical therapist too.
Well, we're partial, we're biased. Yes, indeed, we think it's the right way to go.
Yeah.
But, if you don't have access, there are
No,
other.
I live far from here, but I could go to the Radnor office.
Oh, Radnor, we love Radnor. A lot of great therapists out there, absolutely.
So I'll make an appointment. Thank you.
Okay, excellent.
Any other questions?
We're told that because of the denervated heart, you may not experience angina or, inadequate oxygen supply to the heart. So is there any way when you're doing these exercises or when you're doing cardiac rehab, you can monitor for that?
I would fall back on if you're not feeling chest pain, the classic signs of cardiac distress. So if you start to feel pale, lightheaded, diaphoretic, can't catch your breath, those are still all signs. Or even if you just feel like something is not right, then I would stop what you're doing and seek medical advice. Basically, that's
Do
the.
you monitor people, do EKG monitoring during your
So in the inpatient setting, yes, but you guys are all out in the community and everything as well. So if you were in an outpatient structure physical therapy program, we would do basic vital sign response. You know, checking your blood pressure, your heart rate, your oxygen, and seeing how you're responding to activity with that.
But cardiac rehab, like the first, this outpatient phase of cardiac rehab is EKG monitored, right? So if you haven't done that before, and you want to have a lot of confidence building for being able to aerobically exercise and lift weights and do all that, that's a must. You get a three, you learn how to put your leads on yourself. I mean, for all of you guys that have gone through it, oftentimes in the third week, you kind of coming in, hooking yourself up maybe with a monitor, and, therapist is looking, or one of the cardiac nurses, and making sure that your rate rhythm is good to start, and it's going on the entire time you're exercising. So if there are some changes that you aren't necessarily symptomatic for or feeling, then they will stop you and say, okay, let's see what's going on, and check other vital signs, like Maliki said, to make sure you're safely exercising.
We did bring copies of all the outpatient cardiac rehab programs that we are aware of in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. So if anyone needs a handout of that, we have all those resources available. Any other questions on anything? Yep.
Any role for the watches, smart watches?
So that's a good question. I think that some of the technology is out there, particularly to do heart rate response and activity. Whether or not they truly correlate with your physiologic response and how accurate they are, particularly if you have an underlying irregular rhythm, is tough to say. The larger thing is, I think that with those watches, it also helps you keep track of your exercise program and maintain some level of accountability as well. I don't know, comment much more on the role of the watches in the recovery process.
Yeah. If I can just say, I have one of those watches, and it measures my heart rate. It has a pulse ox, has an altimeter, so I know where I am in terms of elevation. Of all those things, of everything that I've done, I think I always go back to what I learned here at Penn, which was if I'm doing an activity and I start feeling my heart rate in my earlobes, and I feel that throbbing, I know that my heart is probably in a danger zone, and I need to scale back. And if I scale back from that point, I can try it again once everything's back under control. But every day I try to go out there and go a little bit further than where I was the day before. And if I can go a little further before I get that ramp and that throbbing in my earlobes, then I know I'm pushing the right direction. But of all the technology that I have access to, and we all have access to, it's the lowest tech monitoring that I do.
That's a great point, and that's what, Sarah had said, ultimately you'll know your body the best and be responsive to how you're feeling. If the question is no monitoring or a smart watch that might be able to give you some indication of how your heart rate is responding, yeah, take a look at it. It's not, you're not using it for research purposes for it to be super accurate to some other thing, but better than nothing. But like what Derek's saying, right? You got to pay attention to what you're doing, which you will.
Any other questions? Yep.
I think with technology too, we all have pretty much smartphones. They count our steps. So if you want to put yourself on a program where you say, I want to do 10,000 steps a day, your smartphone's already counting that, whether you know that or not, and you can check that. So there's a level of measuring your physical activity throughout the day or throughout the week.
Right, and that kind of leads back to like what our key ending point was, like the overall thing is, healthy heart begins with you, and it gives you some accountability that you're making progress towards your structured goals every day as well.
And that segues into a shameless plug for the Heart Walk, which will be next Saturday at Citizens Bank Park. I am on Team Penn Medicine, certainly to honor my donor. This will be my 4th year doing the Heart Walk. So if you're not registered, you can register with Team Penn Medicine and do the walk. Yes, Bob?
And a similar point, in New Jersey, in West Deptford at River Winds Community Center, on this Saturday morning at 8:30, there's a heart walk for the Fall South Jersey heart walk. I'll be speaking with that.
Awesome. You take this.
They'll have one. I've
Is
been
there
there, done that.
any final question before we take some final steps before we break for lunch?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, as far as strength training, when that's something that regularly done. Is there maybe a YouTube program or something for seniors or sort of guidance for how to lift the weights and what to actually do? You would recommend?
We can talk about that after lunch, I'm sure there are, I don't know.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm positive it's
Guaranteed.
something
Yeah,
There's
exists.
so much out there.
yeah.
Go search on what you're looking for. Guaranteed to be out there. Guaranteed.
Safe strength, strengthening or something, you put that in probably, and you'll come up with some, for posture, for, amount of weight and all that.
Well, as I said, and want to make sure those who came in later get a chance to learn this, but anyway, a couple last minute introductions. Clem, you came in late. Who are you and how long you got?
Clem Collins, how's everybody doing? I had my heart transplant at Heinemann, have a moment of silence. And I'm 10 years out in November.
Okay. Who else joined us? Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gladys Thomas, and I'm here from the I Care for Me project, and it's for caregivers of heart failure patients. So I want to ask of that.
Okay. And
Sir, my name is Joel Aguila. I had my heart transplant here on August 13th.
when?
August 13th.
Oh,
2 months ago.
Yes.
Peter Butler, I got my heart from Penn. Yay, 2007.
Good. As I started to say, we do record this. If there was something you said you don't want to be heard on the recording, just see me, I can edit it out. I don't think there is any such thing. But it's also available online on YouTube. You can search it there. Or you can go to the trioweb.org website. TRIO is Transplant Recipients International Organization. We have a library of these kind of presentations. And this is, I think it's number 104. And so shortly after this, we'll get this posted and we'll send out an email to those email addresses we have to give you that link that you can share with your family or friends. And for those who couldn't make it, if we have a future event, you can't make it, just know that they all are recorded. They're up there. And while you can't answer your question, you can still hear everything that went on. And so, by way of parting, just keep this in mind. The real trick is to stay alive as long as you live, right? Yeah. And so, you've been given an extension of life. Be that 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, a quarter of a century. I still can't believe that. I really can't. But nevertheless, the challenge we all have is, what are you going to do with that gift? Same challenge that everybody who hasn't had a heart transplant has a gift, but they don't think much about it. And I think we as heart recipients really appreciate the day we have more than the average person. And so by all means, live life to the fullest. And so in closing, I want to say a special thank you to the Solid Heart of Gold Fund that funds the luncheon we're about to go to, and our heart social worker team, Sally, Debbie. Thank you. And if you haven't already, please add your contact information to the list out there. It saves them some phone calls. We have about 300 names on that list now, of which about 150 we have email addresses. They get advance notice of these meetings. You can respond, get checked in without them having to call. And so they end up calling the other 150. And so if you could help out by doing that, sure would appreciate it. The signage,
a lot today.
good. And she passed it on to me. I put it in our database so that you'll get that in the future. By all means, if you haven't gotten your parking voucher yet, if you drove in, see, there we go. And the luncheon will be the round tables out here. By all means, sit with somebody you don't know, okay? Get to meet somebody else. There's some very interesting characters out here. And with thanks to our panel, great job, guys. The next transplant event will be the holiday party, Monday, December 9th at 5:30, and now lunch is served. Thank you.